the first video of Citizens Gone Wild, and I'm Dr. George. Are we the first generation of Americans to pay people to spit in our faces? Apparently so. On college campuses throughout the United States, people are paying professors who don't much like them, who downgrade the civilization that most of them like, Western civilization, the values that they like, freedom of speech, which they don't very much. And they don't much like the middle class, and they don't much like Israel, and they don't much like, above all else, the United States of America, which they portray the history thereof in a very, very negative fashion. According to many of the professors on college campuses and the administrators who go along with them, there's something dreadfully wrong, primordially wrong with the United States. We are, according to the current thinking, born in sin, the sin of slavery, and we've never quite recovered. Now, on a lot of colleges, this is exactly what is taught. In fact, on practically all the major state colleges, this is exactly what is taught. Professors of the left and those who have learned from them control to a large extent, I will argue, the worldview we have. Now, what the heck is a worldview? It's the basic idea you have, what is right, what is wrong, how do I know what is right, where do I look for guidance, how should I act? Should I be in the imitation of Christ, or should I follow the Jewish religion, or should I listen to these people, the intellectuals? Now, intellectuals have to be defined, unfortunately, but intellectuals are basically people of words and nothing else. That doesn't mean they're unimportant. They're extremely important, but they don't plant cotton. They don't teach children to read. They don't mine coal. They basically use words. They talk a lot. They write a lot. They preach a lot. And they have, I think, in my opinion, taken over. And those people don't much like the worldview that we had until about 1980. Worldviews, again, deal with good and evil. And before the new worldview that we're now, I think, under to a large degree, we had other views. For example, Christianity is another view. How should you act? Well, you should act as close as you can to Christ, how he would act. Now, we can't achieve that level of goodness, but we can try, and that's how we know how to act, okay? The idea of Judaism, Christianity, and some other religions as well, is that there is a moral code embedded in the universe that is universal and eternal. That will never change, no matter where you go in the universe, no matter if you go in the future, or if you somehow find out a way to go in the past. This is given to us. Now, this, of course, is a view of Christianity and Judaism. And it was pretty much the rule of the way of thinking in Europe until somewhere around the 17th, 16th century. At that time, intellectuals, again, these were people of words. At that point, they were mainly lawyers, but later they became professors, and they sat outside in Paris cafes, drank strong coffee, and discussed various issues. They believed that, well, they grew dissatisfied with their traditional religion, Bible-based religion. And they came to believe, slowly but surely, that maybe the world could be better run than the way it is. That maybe they could mainly eliminate evil in the world. And the way they would do it, they thought, was, well, we're pretty smart. Why don't we take over, provide a new worldview, and we'll order society correctly. It'll be more harmonious. In fact, we can achieve perfect harmony. Everyone will get along with everyone else. No one will judge anyone by a secondary characteristic such as you're a member of the clergy or you're not. You're black, you're white, you're man, you're woman, homosexual, heterosexual. Now, those things came later, but the whole idea was everybody's okay. It's a very powerful and convincing story. Now, the men of words took over in France, that would be called the French Revolution, after a long time. And when they took over, they evidenced certain characteristics that are fairly common to the men of words of today. First of all, they created a new man. Now we would say a new man, a new woman, but they created a new person. And they were crazy about, very enthusiastic about new words. For example, they renamed the days of the week. They renamed the month. They renamed everything in sight. The most important thing they renamed, was what you call citizens. Now, the United States also had a revolution at almost exactly the same time. But we limited government to providing liberty and equality before the law. I'm not saying we did it entirely, but we pushed in that direction. The French, however, pushed further, and they said liberty, equality, and fraternity are our goals. Now that's powerful stuff. You'll find, by the way, that most professors like the French Revolution more than they like the American Revolution. It has a more glorious ending if it ends well. And the people then said, what is fraternity? It's love, it's affection, it's everyone belongs, everyone's someone. That's powerful stuff. That is very powerful stuff. People will sacrifice their lives for that. They thought there could be a world of perfect harmony with liberty, equality, and fraternity. And who would guide this world? Well, basically we, the intellectuals, will guide this world. And of course, it'll be very democratic. We'll always be looking out for your interests, the interests of the people. So basically, this was a time when France was in real trouble economically, partly because they helped us in our revolution. That costs, the war always costs a lot of money. And the people who got in charge, there were names that you may have heard vaguely: Robespierre, Danton. And if you've read A Tale of Two Cities or seen the movies, there are a number of good versions, you may have heard these names even more. And the French intellectuals basically took over. Now, there's something important here. There was a lot wrong with France. It was a society that was like a layer cake. At the top were the king and the queen, the aristocracy just below them, the clergy just below them, and sitting at the bottom, at the very bottom, were the peasants and the workers, who basically worked their guts out, got very little of money or respect in return. And it was a world of a fair amount of oppression, of a fair amount of disregard for people at the bottom, which made up about 90% of the people. If you remember the opening scene in A Tale of Two Cities, a kind of stagecoach is rocketing through the city, and it hits someone, an ordinary worker. The aristocrat who's in the stage, in the coach, looks out, sees this man writhing in pain, tosses him a few coins, and they drive on, rocketing through the city. That was the basic attitude. There are those at the top to those at the bottom. The intellectuals get in charge because there's economic chaos. Food is scarce. People are living very poorly, even more poorly than they started out before that era. And the intellectuals get in charge, basically promising heaven on earth. Heaven on earth. And unfortunately, they didn't quite get there. For one thing, there's a lot of chaos because decisions are made in a disorderly fashion. The intellectuals argue amongst themselves. Should we do A? Should we do B? Should we do C? What do we do about foreign countries? Should we invade them? Should we leave them alone? What do we do about these people that are demanding bread, and so on and so forth? And they got quite annoyed when the peasants and the workers said, This is not working. What am I getting out of this? And they didn't like that. They didn't like it at all. They expected to be revered as kind of gods. And so people kept speaking up and causing trouble, and they decided what we're going to do is, and this happens all the time, we're going to kill these people. We're going to kill the people who criticize us. We're going to kill the people who undermine us. And so if you remember the movie or the book, they would put these people in these little carts, and they would be trundled to the guillotine. Now, the guillotine was actually thought to be a humane measure. A person died quickly. Once your head is off your body, it's no good. So they thought this would be a humane way of killing people. And they killed a lot of people. Because a lot of people said, what's going on here? I thought we had free speech. Womp. And this went on. And you'll find the same sort of thing in other revolutions, whether you look at Russia, Cambodia, or other places as well. China, for example. There was a lot of death. There was also a lot of hatred, blind fury at people. Now, this started before the French Revolution went through it. One fellow who was a revolutionary said that he would not be happy until the last king was strangled by the guts of the last aristocrat. The last priest was often used in that saying as well. There was a lot of hatred. There was nasty use of language, which was encouraged. You'll find this encouragement at the time of the French Revolution. You'll find this encouragement at the time of the Russian Revolution. It was thought if you used nasty, blunt language, it undermined the bourgeois, who didn't like that. That's the middle class, basically. There was, of course, less and less free speech, and fewer people wanted to speak up because it often ended with your head separated from your body, after which you couldn't speak at all. And then what happened was they started to turn on each other. There's an old saying that revolutions always end up devouring their own, and they did. These are people with strong views, strong passions, ready to use violence, and they started to use it against each other. Society descended into chaos, and other countries, which had kings and queens and things like that, began to worry that this sort of thing might spread, and they wanted to keep their body attached to their bodies. So eventually, what happened in France was a Frenchman came along, Napoleon, and he, with a whiff of grape shot, that's little particles that are shot out like nails out of the guns they had, the cannons they had at that time, he put an end to the chaos. Unfortunately, he replaced the chaos with a dictatorship. And he started roaming through Europe, taking over different countries and subjecting them to some good things, the Enlightenment values, but also some bad things like slaughtering strangers. After this, Napoleon wiggled around for about a century and a half, I guess. And then they put him on a little island, told him to shut up and stay there, which he did. Although one time he escaped and came back, then they told him to shut up and stay there, and he stayed. During the following centuries, there were attempts at revolution to make a better world. In 1848, there was a large number of nations that tried to establish a better world, especially in Germany. Well, it wasn't Germany yet, but it was becoming Germany. And that's when a lot of Germans came from Europe to the United States. And we got words like kindergarten and other things happen. Now, at the end of the 19th century, people started to think in terms of socialism, of Marxism, partly because of Karl Marx. And Karl Marx painted a picture of the universe that there was always good and evil. There were always oppressors and oppressed. But when his style of governing took over, there would be no more oppressors and oppressed. We would all be equal in the name of Marx. And that's what Karl Marx taught. that there was always slave and slave master. And in the current time, Karl said that there was owners of industry and workers, and they were always going to be oppressed. And then finally, after a while, there would be so few rich and so many poor that the workers would rise up and overturn the rule in that country. There would be a brief period of dictatorship, and then all would be glorious. All would receive what they needed from society, all would get what they needed from society, and everyone could live in dignity. Well, Karl Marx died, and he had a tremendous influence, perhaps more influence than anyone else has had in the entire modern era, going backwards and forwards centuries. And people talked and talked, the intellectuals talked and wrote, and nothing much happened. And then a guy named Antonio Gramsci, an Italian, was put in jail. Never put a revolutionary in jail. Shoot him or let him go, but not both. And the problem is, if you put them in jail, they have time to think and they write stuff down. And then the stuff that's written down starts more trouble. Antonio Gramsci, I could have been a revolutionary if I had a name like that. Looked around at his fellow prisoners. He was a prisoner in jail at that time for being a revolutionary, trying to overthrow the government. He looked around at his fellow intellectuals and he decided, you folks couldn't overturn a outhouse with a locking door. You're just not up to it. You're not the type of people to go up against a whiff of grape shot, and certainly not against automatic weapons. But you are pretty smart and you have a great command of words. I got it. What we'll do is we'll infiltrate the school systems. And over a period of time, we will have controlled the children's minds, and they will grow up basically as Marxists. They will believe what we believe. And by sneaking in, no one will see us operating really. And then eventually we will take over and we will create a better world, heaven on earth. Now, this sort of worked out, except not from kindergarten up. It started at the top, colleges and universities. Here's one thing that happened in this country. We had a terrible war. You may have read about the Vietnam War. We lost 10,000 men, lost their arms, legs, eyesight, paralyzed, never got a good night's sleep afterwards. Just terrible stuff. 60,000 people died. It was costly as hell. And in the end, we left and the communists took over anyway. Now, during the war, people were getting very unhappy about it, and the Army and the other branches of service, but mainly the Army, found it harder and harder to get people to show up for work. So we had a draft, and they were drafting more and more people, but they said, you know what? If you're in school, you can stay in school as long as you like, and you can get out of it. And a poor boy would take your place probably. But, well, they didn't say that, but people who were already hostile to the United States went into school and then graduate school. And they thought, this is pretty nice. There's no shooting here, it's air conditioning, it's heated, this is nice. And they started to look at the job of the professor and they thought, this is nice. 4 months off in the summer, a week off in spring, a week off a month off in the winter time. This is nice, very, very nice. They pay you, they give you a major medical plan, they give you a great pension. This is nice. And I get to influence other people. And once I get tenure, I have pretty much absolute job protection. So I'll be on the down low, but when I get tenure, I'll start to tell the people the truth about how rotten this country is, how rotten Western civilization is, how rotten white people are, and so on and so forth. By the way, you might be interested in how the hell do they get around the fact that they were white? 99% at one time were white of the people who were becoming tenured because they want to stay out of the war. Well, it turns out that you can be forgiven for the sin of being white or male or liking Western civilization if you're amongst the saved. To be saved meant to believe in what the professors were telling you about the rottenness of Western civilization and the golden land about to come into fruition. There were a lot of people that had influence then, but my favorite is an idiot named Paul de Man. Actually was an idiot, very smart. And this is typical of these people. Paul de Man had a job during World War II. He wrote propaganda for the Nazis. This is the real Nazis, not the people who cut you off in the parkway. And he basically had the same message in all of the essays, at least the ones I read. The Jews are our misfortune. We must get rid of them. Okay. After World War II, there was chaos in Europe, and people were hungry, people were starving, and people needed the protection of their families, of their husbands in particular, so that the women wouldn't get raped. Paul de Man looked around and said, I'm out of here. He came to the Ivy League school, Yale. Yale and the other Ivy League schools are to a great degree responsible for covering the colleges nowadays with political correctness, with a generally Marxist view of the world. He got on the English department and he got a job. By the way, later, he, having abandoned his family over there, he was looking for a woman and he found her in a graduate student. This is also typical. And what he preached was something that at first seems senseless, but has become the view of the world, of the academic world. First of all, he looks for books and literature. That was his area. And he said, you know, who's more important, the critic or the guy who wrote the book? And he said, well, of course, the critic. And at first people say, what? How can that be? But he gradually convinced people that the critic was the most important person. That they who didn't write the book knew more than the person who did write the book, the poem, the play. And he came up with another, what seemed like a fantastic idea at one time. And at the same time, people in Europe were doing the same thing in academia. He looked around and he said, you know what? There's no reality. Reality is a construction. Now, what he meant by that was that there are tables, there are chairs, there are automobiles, but everything is seen differently according to what? According to your race, your class, your gender, and your sexual orientation. That came a little later. And again, at first people said, what the hell are you talking about? But he was at Yale, he was confident, and gradually it caught on. Professors liked the idea that they were more important than the works they were explaining. I guess that was part of it. And what happened after these people got in charge? Paul de Man's students, and then it gradually spread from English to other areas, and now it basically covers the earth, including, to my surprise, areas like mathematics. You will now see problems given in political terms. If you have one poor peasant, and then he brings his cousin, another poor peasant, to live with him, how many poor peasants do you have? 2. This, believe it or not, is going on full steam. Now, obviously, the mathematics and the other hard sciences are much less politically correct than the other areas. The other areas have been totally swamped by this attitude of the social construction of the reality and the evilness of the United States, the evilness of Western civilization, and for some reason, we have no luck, the evilness of Israel. So the values of the middle class, be polite, be orderly, don't scream, don't hate. The line forms on the right. We'll vote, and that's how we'll change things. We'll talk, and we'll discuss things, and we'll compromise, and that's how we'll change it. All of that was pushed to the side and denigrated. And instead, they had the idea, we're right, you're wrong, there's absolutely no reason why you should be able to talk on campus. And more people were hired with this attitude, and people knew if they didn't have this attitude, they were not going to be hired. Western civilization was out. It used to be when you went to college, You had to take 2 semesters of Western civilization, 2 semesters of English course. When I went to Rutgers, English was used to flunk out the liberal arts kids, and calculus was used to flunk out the engineers or the wannabe engineers. So the value system changed on college campuses, and it will be different when your children go to school there as well. A lot of things changed. First of all, tolerance went out the window. Why should it be tolerant when I know the truth? Why should I let you speak when I know the truth already? Why should I let you teach when I know the truth and your view is wrong? There's no point to it. Patriotism went out. People who were patriotic were not on campus anymore. I remember when we had some troubles that we went to war in the Middle East. You know who had the flags furling out there? The working people. They put them on these long poles and they flew them from the back of their pickup trucks. You didn't see any flags in front of the offices for professors, nothing like that. Hatred came into style. You were allowed to hate, loud and clear. And that's kind of how we are today. I hope to make myself a little clearer. Usually takes me a few tries, but that's pretty good for right now. I also want to explain to you a word each time, so this crazy language that you hear will make some sort of sense. Now, you may have heard the word cancel or the cancel culture. What the hell does that mean? Well, that has to do with the removing of support from public figures in response to their bad behavior or their opinion. They just cancel you. And all of a sudden, your advertisers desert you. This has happened to Tucker Carlson, whether you like him or not. It certainly is against the idea of free speech. Let me hear what you have to say. Bill Maher is against this. He said, go ahead, insult me, say something. I'll refute it. I'm okay. I'm a grown person. I can take it and I can give it back and we can discuss things. And we can have a peaceful resolving of the situation, hopefully. There's a lot of canceling going on between celebrities. Different celebrities rise and fall all the time. And I have a question here, and that is, why can't you get canceled for anti-Semitism? There are a number of people, some politicians and some celebrities that have said god-awful things about Jews, and yet they don't get canceled. But it goes another way. Here's an example. Gordon Klein, a professor at UCLA, a terrific school. And he said that his classes were taken away from him because he refused to grant African-American students exemption for taking final exam. They said they were so traumatized by the George Floyd incident, that they couldn't take the exam. And he said, well, we're going to have the exam at such and such a date. You have to be here. For saying something like that, he, after teaching at the school for 39 years, first of all, he was doxxed. There's another word. Doxxed means that they reveal your personal life. They made public his email and his home address so these poor people could be threatened. And they do threaten them. One time when Tucker Carlson, who's on the outs with the left, was at home, his wife called up in desperation. These minor thugs came by the house and they were hooting and hollering. They actually tried to physically break in. And his poor wife is scared out of her mind. This is what they do nowadays. He was put on leave. He's not teaching this semester. He's under police protection. He's not the only one. I was talking to someone at Staten Island, teaching in the Staten Island area. I don't want to name him. I was talking to him and he said, I have to get off the line now. What's wrong? There are police outside my door protecting me. Tiffany Riley, a Vermont school principal, was placed on administrative leave. In a Facebook post, she said she agreed with Black Lives Matter, but she didn't support coercive measures to advance that cause or demonize the police. in the politically correct world and now dominates universities and dominates a lot of the media, it isn't enough that you're for a cause. You have to prove that you are enthusiastically for a cause. That's something that I never thought would arrive outside of North Korea, but it definitely has arrived. Here's another person, University of Chicago, one of the finest universities in the world. He was fired from a consulting job with the Federal Reserve. He was an economics professor. And he said that Black Lives Matter, that movement, had hurt itself by aligning itself with the idea of defunding the police, because people may be angry, but they don't want to be without the police. Black people don't want less police. They want them to act better, but they want more and more police. They're constantly complaining about the lack of police in their areas. There's a professor at the University of Chicago who was fired from the consulting job that I'm talking about now. There, that'll teach him. And a guy named Harold Ulig. And he was canceled. Yeah, we'll have to take that slip out if you can.
I can edit that out. You can pick it up too if you need to.
Okay. All right. Anyway, maybe not. It'll show I'm suffering, and maybe people will watch again. Anyway, he actually groveled and gave an abject apology, but it's no good. It is no good to grovel to these people. They are merciless. On the other hand, if you criticize the right people like Jews, you can get away with it. Chelsea Handler, who's, I guess, a television personality and a comedian, posted a video of national Islam hate monger Louis Farrakhan on her Instagram page, and she praised him for what he said. Well, Farrakhan is one of the great haters of our time. He's wildly anti-Semitic. And but she refused to back down, and she said, well, he may be anti-Semitic, but he said something good over here. And then the fellow celebrities reached out and said, no, we agree with her. People, I'm not saying these are intellectual heavyweights, but Jennifer Aniston, Jennifer Gardner, Michelle Pfeiffer voiced support for Handler. You don't get canceled if you criticize white people or men or Jews. You're okay there. And people have been elected to the Democratic Party more and more all the time. For example, Representative Ilhan Omar, who mentioned that one of the classic tropes that have gotten Jews killed over the centuries is they're somehow greedier, that they're trying to take over the world. And she said all the Jews were interested in was the Benjamins. And I guess Benjamins is slang for $100 bills. And but she got away with it. And then the entire Democratic Party, instead of condemning it, the Republicans have put together a bill that would, well, it was a statement that said this was terrible what she did, she should apologize and all. Anti-Semitism has led to a lot of deaths of Jews. You really shouldn't do this. But what happened was the Democrats said no. They said, in effect, all lives matter. We're going to condemn all kinds of hatred. Well, that's nice, but all kinds of hatreds weren't on the bill. What was on the bill here was hatred of Jews, and one of the most blatant bits of bigotry around. But they said, well, we're just going to be against all types of hatred. Speaking of hatred, I'm going in another direction. I'm going to tell a couple of jokes so I can calm down and you can go away from the show happy, or maybe you'll come back. If you had to choose between drinking and wine every day or being skinny, would you choose red or white? Here's one. The fact that jellyfish have survived for 650 million years despite not having brains, gives hope to many people. Here's one where the wife says to the husband, Did I get fat during quarantine? You might want to take notes on this one. Husband, you were never really skinny. Time of death, 4/25/20, 11:23 p.m. Cause of death, coronavirus. Let's see if we get docs for this one. If I were a plastic surgeon, I would 100% put a squeaky toy in every breast implant. And I'm going to offer this great plan that I have. It's the $5 once a week plan, which will alleviate poverty for a number of people. My idea is that once a week, just once, don't overdo it. We want you to keep doing it. Once a week, you give a $5 tip to people who don't get tip. A grocery clerk who shows you where the celery is. Someone at Home Depot who shows you where the right type of nail is that you should use in hammering down your deck. The garbage people who pick up the garbage. Man, you take a look at these garbage people. They are working hard. They work hard for their money, and I doubt that they're doing that well, and I doubt they find much things of value in the garbage you people are throwing out. So once a week, you give $5 to one of those people. It'll work, I think, because of numbers. You know, as you go to a coffee shop and you put down $5, the coffee shop maybe have 100 customers that day. If they're one of the chains, that's $500. Just do it once. Don't be a show off. You get tired of that. We'll do it once, and I think we can make things a little bit better. And for those of us who are still waiting for the revolution, we can do something good in the meantime. I thank you for spending some time with me, and I hope that you can spend some time with me next time. If you want to get in touch with me, citizensgoingwild@aol.com and leave a message. I hope you're going to do well and do some good today. We'll see you next week, I hope. Bye-bye.